Hello and welcome to Chatterbox, the podcast where we speak to different artists about their creative odysseys and figure out what they do, why they do it, where they do it, how they do it, when they do it, but most importantly, how they are navigating the business world using their craft to try and monetize it. In today's episode, we're extremely privileged to have someone that for a very long time I did not believe existed. I actually thought that this person was an urban myth or a legend. And so the title of this particular episode is Multidisciplinary Warrior. And it is my great pleasure to present to you this week the very artistic, and I'm going to read out all the accolades so that we may see exactly what he does. And this doesn't even cover half of it. Jim Chuchu. Jim.
Multidisciplinary Warrior.
Multidisciplinary Warrior.
Okay, I'll take that.
It's amazing to have you. How are you doing, bro?
I'm doing fine.
You well?
Yes.
Dude, as I said, my name is Eric. I'm the host of this particular podcast, and our guest is the enigmatic Jim Chuchu. I won't even say almost enigmatic. It's the enigmatic Jim Chuchu. And I just want to read out the accolades and the various things that this guy does. Jim is an editor, a producer, a filmmaker, a director, a musician, a visual artist, a graphic artist, a photographer, a founding member of HEVA and the Nest Collective. I think also somewhere they forgot to say he's also Batman in his spare time. So I don't know, Jim, like, have I left anything out?
No, I think there's even some stuff there that I would hesitate to claim, like producer.
Really?
Yeah.
I've seen you produce stuff, Jim. So you can't escape that.
Okay. So yeah, I think that covers it.
Okay, so when we were researching this, it was very difficult for us to basically pin down how the podcast would pan out. And the reason for that was that there was so many facets. And I kept on telling the guys that, and this is absolutely true, when I first heard of you, I didn't think you existed. I thought that you were an urban myth, like a legend. Like a collection of artists had come together and they'd created this pseudonym of Jim Chuchu, and they were all working under it because there were so many things that you were doing. And so eventually when I met you, I was like, wow, this person actually exists. It's like meeting Santa Claus. It's like meeting Santa Claus. And that was phenomenal. And it was phenomenal because of two things. As a child growing up, I always wanted to be different things every week. So I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to be a father. Not at the same time, but I wanted to be all these things. But you're living that childhood dream. You're doing all these different things, aren't you?
I can't say that this happened naturally. I think there's things that I've been able to do that have been a surprise, that were not planned. And for the longest time, I felt a lot of guilt about not being able to stick to one thing.
Yeah.
And I think early in my career, a lot of people asked me like, can you choose one thing? Are you a photographer? Are you a musician?
Yeah.
And often I had people say, what's that thing they say about master of none?
Yeah,
Jack of all trades,
master of none, yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely a thing that I struggled with for the longest time. And then I started to accept that, okay, things happen and I should be present for everything that happens to me, because there are opportunities, there are things that you get to say in different ways.
Yeah.
So these days I'm a bit more comfortable about.
I think to do all the things that you do, it takes a lot of passion, and nothing embodies this passion more than a talk you gave, I think in 2016 in Johannesburg for TEDx. We're going to roll that clip now. I think we can watch this on this screen here as Jim blushes.
They're turning to citizenships. And that means that we don't see you again and we don't see your work. And we feel like it's important for these minds to come back home, to show your work in the continent, because you have no idea how important it is for us to see ourselves in film and in books and in music. You have no idea how important it is for the kids to see themselves and to imagine that they are more than what they are told they are. We have a rampant predatory Christianity.
As You speak with a lot of conviction, Jim. There's a lot of conviction in your voice.
I've actually never watched this video.
You have never watched this video.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You speak with a lot of conviction about representation, and that's what the tie-in for us was. And we looked at all your different works, and we saw a lot of it was really about representing either voices that are not heard enough in our society or communities, or representing the things that go on around us that are taken for granted, that they never really happen here.
Yeah, representation. That's a good way to tie everything together, because I think as a Black person, as a queer person, as an African, there are so many ways in which we are erased in media. If you watch, and I think I started to feel this when I was younger, when you'd watch TV and you'd see a scene shot in Africa and you'd be like, this is what not,
I see.
Yeah, this is not where I live. This is not how I see myself. And it kept happening. And to this day, I think the other day I was just looking at this trailer that Beyonce has put out.
Yes.
And you look at it and you say, okay, this is different. I mean, because now people are talking about Black power and like Africa as a place where magic can happen.
Yeah.
But even with that, there's still something happening there that's like
not really.
Because people are calling it the Wakandization of Africa, which is like now you go from portraying Africa as this place that's full of disease, poverty, and sickness.
Yeah.
And now you go to this, now
extreme,
all of them are kings and queens and magicians.
I actually have a problem with like self-aggrandizement, where people always say, I'm a Black king, I'm this, and I'm like, yeah, but no.
Like, yeah, you can see, I mean, after centuries of being told that you're animals, then moving to we are kings, okay, that's important, right?
Yeah.
But then I'm just like, man, it's somewhere in the middle.
There's a transition. There's no way one minute you're this thing and then the next minute you're an emperor. If we were all kings, like, I don't think there's enough land in Africa. Like, then you wouldn't have any subjects.
Yeah.
Because you go to someone and say, I'm a king. And he's like, I'm also a king.
And I think we're at a place in the world now where kings are not necessarily good things. We are starting to learn that investing power in one person is not the way to solve societal problems. People tried it with Obama, where they said, yes, we can, everything will change. And then look what happens afterwards.
There's a systemic like structure that needs to be approached in a different way.
Exactly.
Let me go back to when I first got acquainted to you. And I think most people got acquainted to you years ago when you were a member of Just a Band, a founding member of Just a Band, and we were acquainted to you through the music. How did the band come together?
I first met Bill in high school, same high school. Yeah. So that was when we were 14 years old. And we were both interested in music, but we didn't consider ourselves musicians, right? And like there was music classes happening in the school which we were not studying. So I think both of us were coming at music from a kind of an outsider perspective. So we were in the same house. So we started to he was kind of figuring himself out as a songwriter. There's a lot of gospel music. And I was trying to figure myself out. I think I'd studied like classical piano when I was 10 or 11 for a year.
Oh, wow.
Or so.
Yeah. I did not know that.
But there's a thing about studying classical piano where it's like you're sitting at the feet of like all these European like masters, right?
Yes,
and it's like it's so much about reading. It's not about improvisation.
It's too structured. It's boxed in a way. Yeah.
So when I got to high school, I think I once went to the chapel and I saw these guys like playing the piano, right?
Yeah.
Like it was not about books, and I was entranced by that. And so I remember just trying to figure out how do you play music like this, where it's like just what you're feeling, and you know when you're accompanying Kenyan Christian choirs, like guys go on tangents.
Go,
Like the vocalist will jump from one key to the other without any
like warning.
It's
just like, let's
so
go.
I was like, man, how do you do that? Anyway, so I started to learn that, and then Bill came and we wrote songs together. And then when we went to university, and we also met there again.
The same university,
because like you know when you go to university, it's like
were you guys cheating in the same exam so that you'd end up? You can tell us, like,
like it's weird because like Bill was my friend, but it didn't feel like we were going to be like like
Life
long
friends. Yeah.
It was just like, yo, we're in the same school together. So we go to campus and he's there.
He's there as well.
And then next to his hostel was a little room with a piano. And he was like, yo,
There's a piano here.
Yeah, we can jam. So we go jam, and then Dan was in my class and in my hostel. So we kind of just bumped into one another. And then someone said, you guys should form a band. Yeah.
Are you cutting this guy who said you should form a band royalty check?
It was a friend of ours called Yvonne.
Uh-huh.
And for her, it was just kind of like this thing you say.
Yeah.
So she was kind of surprised that
you actually followed through and
that
did
we followed through, and then but that was in 2003.
That's 2003, yeah.
So the first time we put out music was in 2007. After many years, we ran our website, like a music website.
A music website, yeah.
We wrote the first when Pulse was launched in Standard. We were the guys who were writing all the music interviews.
Whoa.
So we kind of spent like 4 years just kind of figuring out our own voice, because we were meeting all these other musicians. And so when we first put out our album, 2007, 2008, then now it became like a real thing.
Like a real thing.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because when I first heard Just a Band, the music, it was so new, so very fresh. I was still trying to find my Africanness and Kenyanness, having basically been very quite removed from that, and then now getting here and trying to find that. It was so very new and fresh, and it was not Western, and it was not the music our parents listened to, but yet again, it was not too far removed whereby you were like, it's too foreign. There was a familiarity to it that just sort of spoke to a lot of people in a very distinct way. And the funny thing is that once you guys started doing the music and doing that, you guys started producing videos, music videos. And what I loved about those music videos was that the theme of familiarity yet newness carried forth. So the way I picture the music in my head is the same thing I saw on the music videos, which was amazing, because on most occasions you have musicians who are singing about one thing, and the video is there's a musician singing about finding his way back to Jesus, and there's a girl shaking her booty there. And I'm like, I don't know if this is the way we find our way back to Jesus, but I'm willing to try it. What was that like? Because I imagine there was not a lot of money going around. You guys are still students. You're still trying to make this.
Yeah.
You're doing everything.
All the videos were shot with friends, with like no budget. I think budgets used to be for transport, food, and food was not like, it was like crisps.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah.
Now I know why I would not be in these videos.
Because like we couldn't like afford like like a buffet lunch or whatever. And I think that was it's weird to hear people talk about the stuff in retrospect, because we're like, when you're inside the thing, you don't. That's not.
You don't know.
You don't feel like that's
aware,
what you're doing.
yeah.
Right? You're like, this song. We like this song. How about we try this visual? We put them together, and then it becomes a thing. And maybe that's like the magical thing about being a creator or an artist, is that you have a thought and then you make it into a thing, and then people start to refer to that thing separately from your mind.
From your
right?
mind, yeah.
And it is able to go out into the world and do things without you being
It's
there.
like a life of its own.
Yeah,
It just,
and it means things to other people. So there's something quite magical about that.
Yeah.
Just a Band, people tell me what Just a Band was for them, and I feel like I'm always surprised.
Yeah.
For real, being on the inside, it never felt like
it was reaching as far as I'll tell you honestly, for me it was mind-blowing, to be quite honest. It was mind-blowing, especially because at that particular time I was still moving up and down with I think a bit later on with Wapi. We came a bit later on, and so it was always, because Wapi was really focused on hip-hop.
Yeah.
But Just a Band was really out, like not really hip hop. It was something I don't even know how to describe what music you were doing.
Yeah.
But at that particular point, every single time I would try and reach Just a Band, there was like a sort of like barrier, and that's why I was like, who are these people? You are like Daft Punk, because there was so much work that was out and it was good, but there was no identity. It was work on its own life. It ran with its own legs. So it was not really like, oh, that is Bill, or that is Jim, or that is Dan. It was like, just a band. There's just a band that is in existence, and it's there, and they're doing all this stuff.
Perhaps that was also because there was no Instagram, there was no, so it was like, it was not very easy to broadcast as individuals as it is now.
Yeah.
But I've always been circumspect about this idea of broadcasting the self.
Yes.
I think there's something about social media that feels like it's a power that is in the hands of in ways that are maybe not very useful to people.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, people are talking about like the mental health issues that come with kind of broadcasting a version of yourself to a public, right? I think growing up, I was a very introverted kid. I was not the kid who was on the playgrounds, and also we used to move around a lot, so I never ever got to know my neighbors.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with my folks, but
maybe they were in the CIA.
I don't know. I should ask them one day. And I think when I think about the other members of the band, there was a similar kind of wanting the work to go out into the world without having to be handheld.
Attached, yes.
Yeah.
To something.
So, and maybe that becomes a thing. Maybe people think of that as being mysterious or enigmatic.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, it was most likely, for me, definitely, it was more like a kind of a stage fright, a kind of a not wanting to be in public in that way.
Let the work speak for itself, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because during this particular time, you guys are evolving not just as musicians, you're becoming script writers, because you're writing scripts for your music videos, which, to be quite honest with you, they were like films to a certain degree. I think we were researching this with the director of this podcast, Wanjira Gateri, and we were looking at a song like Hahe, and we were like, this has just blown things out of the water. I don't know if we'll have, I'll speak to the director and find out if we have some time to basically put a small clip in there. Yeah. But for me, it was almost blaxploitation type-esque, but Kenya exploitation. I don't know what to call it, because it was a film in its own. And I asked someone, and I asked them, why don't these guys make this into a TV series? Like, why don't you make that into something? I didn't know what the mechanics of that was, but I was like, this is so good, I would watch this show.
So wow, Hahe and Mark Mende was a strange period for us, because again, we made this video and it was not a big deal. It was like,
we've made a video,
we've called our friends, they've run around with us, and there's something quite playful about like making videos, because you're like adults playing, right? We made this video, we put it out, and then the feedback, and then the madness had happened, and people say it was the first viral video. Again, being on the inside of that was kind of like a storm, because it's like, yo, what's happening? What have we done? And then the next minute, CNN are coming to your house. And it's like, yo, what did we do? And that was cool. And then it started to get quite serious after that, because then it was like, you guys need to make money out of this thing now.
Yeah.
So we had people telling us, yo, we have T-shirts ready. We have like just give us the permission. We're going to do it. If you don't give us permission, we're going to do it anyway. People were registering websites for McMahon. Like, it was crazy. And then the actor, his family were like, yo, this is your chance to make it big, right? So tell those guys to make something out of this.
To make money for you,
So we had his family members come into our house with like, yo, what are you guys
Where's the money? No, actually they think the
what's
money's
your business
there,
plan, right? And then we had like brands coming in and saying, yo, can we use him for a hand washing campaign? And we were like, what does that have to do with,
with Mark Mende,
and all this stuff was happening within days. So our reaction then was to just switch everything off, and we were like, no, this is not a situation where we can make good decisions. So we switched it off, and then people were like, yo, you guys, you lost. I think there's a thing, and I kind of understand it from the perspective that in Kenya, making it is a big deal for creative, right? And so when people see you kind of waste that chance, it can get quite aggressive. But for us, we're like, no, there's something about this that is not making it. There's something about this
That's not right.
Yeah.
I think as well it's and this is my personal belief, is that the problem is a lot of people, especially in this day and age, have equated success to money. So they feel that if you make something, you should make money out of it. And that's not entirely wrong. But sometimes just the idea of being able to put something out into the world is more than sufficient for a lot of people who have a genuine feel for, I think, arts and the craft. It doesn't mean you don't want to get paid out of it. It just means that sometimes people do not set out to make money from something.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that was the same situation.
Definitely. I think the ways that you can make money from art are not always healthy.
Yes.
And the relationship between art and money, and this is funny coming from me doing HEVA now.
Yeah.
But I think I've always understood that the frameworks that bring art and money together, they are frameworks where the artist has to be careful.
Has to be careful.
Yeah.
Because they are very flawed, and I always feel that on certain occasions you have to give a piece of your soul for that to go the way.
Yeah, that's the way that people often frame it. But for me, it isn't necessarily an exchange of soul. There's no place where someone come and tell you, so I want your soul.
Yeah.
Or like it's never as hardly described as that. For me, it's always incremental. It's like a power dynamic that slowly shifts in favor of the person on the other side.
On the other side, yeah.
And like as an artist, it's very difficult to navigate those shifts because they're very gentle, right? And to this day, I see people are struggling with those shifts where people are very good to you when they come and sign papers with you, but then the tone starts to shift slowly, and no one really teaches you how to deal with that shift, right? Yeah. And it's not just art and money; it's also relationships. Like you can get into a relationship with someone, and then they start to change.
Yeah.
And then because you love this person, you're not able to
see how dangerous it's getting. Yeah. So you keep on adapting to what they want.
And whoever teaches you that stuff. Like there's no art school, there's no business school where you're taught how to manage power dynamics.
But there's this podcast. I want to take you to an interview that I was watching with Mutua Matheka, who's I think on the Instagrams, as the young people call it, is known as the Truth Slinger, and he cites you as what pushed him into photography. I don't know if you've watched this interview. He says, I went onto Jim Chuchu's site and I saw what he was doing with photography, and it was just mind-blowing. Because he was representing us in a way that I never thought possible, in a way that I only thought maybe only people in the West can do this, like with photography. And he was seeing himself in those pictures. This is what he actually said, almost verbatim. Oh. How did you get into photography? Number one, it's a two-part question. And number two is, how did then you decide that maybe I can do photography in a way that, again, is very representative of who we are?
When I was 14 years old, I remember thinking I want to make films, right? And that thought just came to me, and it didn't have context. It didn't have a continuation. It was just like, I want to make films. And I think I remember being a kid and being in a cinema and just being like amazed at like the size of the images and the power of the images.
Sound,
So for me, photography was a step towards film because I was like, if I can make one image, then I can make 24 images.
And then you can stitch them
right?
together, and then you can run,
So I was really interested in, even with photography, I think my first camera I took a loan from my brother. I had just quit a job in advertising, my first job. And I was like, I'm gonna do photography and kind of take this as a step towards film. I got this camera and I started experimenting. Again, I'm never able to explain why did I go that path, because like I could have this camera and I could go and shoot animals, you know. But for some reason I was really interested in people. I think the first photographs that I ever took were with a bunch of models who I was doing freelance graphic design for. Yeah. And I was like, I saw they had all these images taken by other photographers, and I asked them, can I take some? Yeah. So they gave me a shot because they were like, we need a couple of like portfolio photos. Yeah. and that was cool. I was enjoying it, and they were like, "Yo, like there's a thing you're doing that's interesting," and then I think that ended up. I started taking photos of like musicians because they were like, "There's something interesting happening here." So that became like a career, and it took me back to advertising because then the advertisers were like, "There's something interesting happening here." I have a very cautious relationship with the advertising industry
agency,
because my first job, I saw the inside of it, and it was not a space that honored creativity or creatives. So, and for a while, I got this reputation as a guy who says no to advertising.
Oh yeah, we know that. we know. I think one of the most difficult things is for people to hear you say no when you obviously need maybe the money.
Yeah.
It's not a sound that a lot of, number one, clients or businesses or entities are used to hearing. It's almost offensive to them.
Yes, and I did get that tone that when you say no, it's like, I don't think there was a framework for understanding the no. And to date, I still say no to a lot of like campaigns because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to sell alcohol to Africans.
Yeah.
Like for me, there's something there that doesn't work because I'm like, I mean, you look at some of these campaigns and you're like, why would people associate alcohol with like greatness?
Yeah.
What are you saying? Why do brands want to use things like nationalism to push products?
Push their products,
like nationalism, especially for Kenya, especially for African countries. It's this very, people have died for nations, right?
Yes.
How are you gonna come and sell scratch cards with that?
With that,
you know? And how am I gonna put my face on that mess, right?
And sleep comfortably at night.
So I'm like, I'm always saying no to these things, and then it gets kind of weird, and people think like, okay,
why are you snobbing?
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm not snobbing. I'm just saying that I haven't yet felt comfortable about using everything that I represent to sell things.
To sell this and that.
Yeah.
I think
this is not to say that, because this is not to say that like people who do that are
horrible
whatever,
or anything,
or are not thinking it through, or that artists shouldn't be associated with money. No, because that's kind of elementary.
Yes.
I'm just saying that people should only do things that they feel comfortable with, and that moral principle you have to decide for yourself.
Consent, in short. I think it's a very difficult topic to have because I've also worked in agency life for a bit, and the problem with that is that a lot of times it stops being about people and just starts being about money, number one, and then starts being a push for work. So the clients behind it do not see that there are people who are basically pushing this machine forward. I liked a film by, I think it's Bo Joon-ho. He just won an Oscar, I think last Oscars. Not Parasite, it was an amazing film, but the one before that, Snowpiercer.
Yeah.
And it's about a train, and basically the engine of this train is basically run by children. And it was so profound for me to see that towards the end. And I thought it was an amazing parallel between especially what creatives do and what other people see, because a lot of people are just seeing a train moving forward.
Yeah.
They do not know that the engine behind that is basically grinding people to death.
Yeah.
And that's something that creatives don't speak about enough. And especially when success comes, I've had creatives say about the pressure to create. So at first you're creating because you love what you're doing, you're trying to express something, and then after a while it becomes something that you have to do for people. One of the producers behind the cameras, his name is Sticky, he's also an artist. He actually did this amazing piece. He's nodding at this. He's like, the pressure to create, yes. But I feel that perhaps this is a good point for us to introduce a film that you and the Nest Collective made. I believe this was in 2014, Stories of Our Lives. For those who have not watched this film, do you mind telling us what the film is about and what the process of making it was?
Yeah, it seems like I moved from one adventure to another. Stories of Our Lives was, I think, in 2013 there was the what was going on in Uganda where they were doing the kill the gays bill.
Yeah.
And I think I remember that conversation kind of spilling over into Kenya. And there was even a group of parliamentarians who were like, if Uganda can do this, why aren't
So
we
can
doing
we,
this?
yeah.
That was a strange period for me and for like every queer person in this country, because we were like, yo, what's it like to live in a country where suddenly your humanity is being discussed as a, should we let this continue, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the conversations around that time were really strange. People were like, should we go to Tanzania? Should we go to... And I'm like, why are we discussing where to escape to? You know?
How is that even a conversation that should be happening? Yeah.
So we're like, okay, people keep saying that queerness is this thing that comes from
the West.
Which is such a strange argument, because then you're telling people that then they are sitting in their homes in Kenya and just accepting to change their lives because of something they've seen on TV. Like, I've never understood that theory of like this thing
is being it's the same, and then also
promoted,
I think it's very it rings very silly in my head, because then it's like queerness comes from the West and we are a Christian nation, and I'm like, oh, hang on. Christianity comes from the West. And so if you're very willing to accept Christianity and queerness is coming from the West, then why are you not willing to accept queerness? Because you embrace Jesus so hard.
And even like, how do people become Christians? Like, you don't like sit and watch TV and then say, I'm going to become a Christian. And then also being queer is like, it's not the easiest thing, right? Because then... think about all the bullying that happens in high school.
Yes.
Like, why would anyone choose
you know that particular... Yeah.
So anyway, so we're like, okay, let's go around the country and let's ask other queer people what queerness means to them, because we're like, is it true? The question for us was like, is it true that only Nairobi is where
they are queer people?
You know, because then... So we went all around the country. We met all these people, like amazing people who would come and tell us. We asked them, like, what has your life been like? When did you find out you're queer? All these questions. And for them, it was interesting because a lot of the research that happens with sexuality in this country is like, how many sexual partners do you have? It's always about disease, being a disease vector, or being it's human rights, or it's health. So then us guys were asking them, like, when did you find out you're queer? What was your first relationship like? It was human questions.
Yes.
So people told us all these amazing stories. It was amazing. Like, it was like, it's an experience for people to tell you their lives. You know, like it's very strange for a human being to tell you this is
intimate details.
Not many people get that chance, let alone with more than 200 people, right? So we came back to Nairobi with these stories, and we're like, in fact, not only does queerness not come from the West, but queerness is very old.
Yes.
In the world, in Kenya, in Africa, in black people, like, and it has its own language. And so even this LGBT thing, like, that's a very Western way of thinking.
That's a new concept. That's what is new. It's not... Being queer is not new. It's this tag that is new.
So we came back with all these stories, and then, you know, people say Kenyans don't read.
Yes.
So we're like, okay, a book is probably not the best way to kind of put this stories together, even though we have published that book, and that book is actually wild. The book is like the wildest thing that exists in this city. Because like all those lives are in that book. And anyway, I shouldn't say this, but we always say that like if Ezekiel banned the film, like the film is like, it's like 2 teaspoons compared to the bucket
to what
that
the book is.
So anyway, we're like, okay, let's make short films based on these stories, and then we take these stories back to the people who gave us the stories. In our heads, it was not a film. It was not a dramatic thing. It was just...
It is basically a documentation
couple of short films. And then we take them back to the communities and show them, yo, these are the stories you guys told us. So that was the plan, and we did, and we shot these short films, and then the plan started to get messy because I think a programmer from Toronto Film Festival came and visited the Nest, and they were like, yo, I just want to see what filmmakers are doing in the country. And I think we didn't even show her those films. They were on a flash disc that we were showing her other things. And then she was like, okay, that's cool, but what is that folder, right? Which is very... Anyway, so we opened
Very
the folder.
nosy, but yeah.
And then she watched one and she was like, yo, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And we're like, but this is not
This
a
is
film.
not,
like, this is like some bullshit. Like we're not the audience,
Yeah.
right? And she's like, no, like, guys, I think there's something here. If you put them together, I will show them at my festival. So then we're left with this quandary of like, okay, should we do this? And there are many reasons not to do it.
Yeah.
Including that many of us were not out to our families, and we were like, okay. So then the festival were like, you can show it anonymously.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine. So that you don't have to deal
So
with
that
all
you don't have to deal with
whatever.
that, yeah.
So we're like, okay. So we shot 2 more to make it a feeture because
It had to be a certain length.
Yeah. We shot 2 more. We sent it and they announced it and there was this crazy period where the film is already announced, it's already in the catalogs, we haven't finished, we're still shooting. Like, we don't even know how to make DC, like all these things that festivals need, we don't know how to do them, shoot a poster, all this stuff. And at the same time, we're just like, oh my God, what are we doing? And then I think we were visited by all these people who said, yo, Anonymous is cool for the festival. It's great for the story, but then, like, are you guys ashamed of what you've done?
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, we are not ashamed. So guys, we have to grow up. We have to be adults about this.
Mm-hmm.
So we went home. People went home, came out. Even the straight members of the collective were like, you have to go home and say that you guys you worked on this film and that you work with these people, right? So everyone kind of had to go home and take this thing on personally. So everyone did that. The film screened at Toronto, which was amazing. The audiences were amazing. Even though that's where we started to hear this question of like, will you guys go back
home? Yeah.
So for me, I was like, wait, what's happening?
Was that?
Yeah. That was the beginning of another kind of thought. We came back. George was arrested. The film was banned. Like, it was just.
This is actually where my next question was going. Was that despite this film being received to critical acclaim across the world, you come back home and the film is banned here.
Mm-hmm.
From the clip that we watched in the beginning, you are a huge advocate for representation, African people seeing themselves in film, in books, in music, at home, not necessarily just abroad, at home as well.
Yeah.
How did this influence your creative process, knowing that a film that you made is banned at home? So the same thing you're fighting for representation in the continent, your film is actually banned at home. How did this affect your creative process?
On a personal level, it was strange, this idea that because, like, as a photographer, as a musician, I make stuff, I put it out. Yeah. There's no intermediaries. There's no person checking it, right? And so with film, this was the first time that then this idea that the things I'm making have to go through someone who I've never met, who I'll never meet, who doesn't know where I'm coming from, right? So it was a strange thing for me because I was like, man, there's so much that I cannot say then. And to this day, even with this film that we released early this year called Tappy, I remember they read the script and they were like, take out these words. Yeah. And I don't think Kenyans understand that. And a lot of people have said to us, you guys should put this film on torrent.
On torrent or whatever, yeah.
And I'm like, no. If we release the film and let you guys watch it, then you are all sidestepping the fact that you live in a country where things are banned like that, right? And as Kenyans, you guys need to figure that shit out.
Yeah.
The artist's job is to make stuff. But the society's job is to say, we are adults. We are not going to be treated like children, right? Yeah. So we've always resisted this thing of like, leak it. Because we're like, no, guys, deal with the fact that
it is not...
Yeah.
It is not
the country you live in that infantilizes you.
And I feel it's horrible for us to pass the buck. So the artist has to create this, spend time, money, effort doing it, and then again go the extra mile to give it to basically spoon feeding.
To fight.
To fight
for the audience
to see it. So if you want to see it, and this is to everyone out there, you have to push for that to be seen. There are various ways to do that. We'll discuss those as we go. But then I want us to go to a conversation that you and I were having a couple of, I think, 2 years ago. It's not 2 years ago. 2 years ago is 2018. 2016 is when I actually eventually met you. And I was like, oh, he's not an urban legend. Oh, thank God. 2016, I meet you at the Goethe Institute. You are having an exhibition called The Bones Remember. And I think we were doing something in the city center, and we stumbled into the Goethe Institute, and then we went there, and you're getting interviewed by the BBC at that particular time. And if I may say, this was it was a very interactive, yet it was photography, but then there was also video, which was a retrospective and introspective look at what traditional African religion and culture would look like if they had not been suppressed by Christianity and Westernization. Tell us about this, the Bones Remember exhibition, and what arc that ties into based on your latest film called Tapi. Yeah. So what does that stand? How does this, what relevance does this have in an urban setting and in a modern setting for Kenya? This cultural and traditional, I don't know what to call it, aspect of who we are that is no longer here to a certain degree.
My relationship with religion has always been, for the longest time I didn't have power over it, and now I do. But growing up, I think we never used to go to church. Like, for some reason, my folks were like,
I think they were moving around. It's like
stay home and read.
Like,
so
it's Sunday, let's go.
Sunday for us was like stay home, read, watch stuff, right? And so when I went to now high school and primary, that's when you meet other kids who are like
born into
religion, and you can see that Sunday is this thing that means something else to other people. High school was where it started to become serious, because in high school you're all staying together. There's no going home. So on Sunday you have to do the church thing. There's no, if you're a Muslim, So I think in high school, there was a rumor that I was a devil worshipper.
Hey!
And I think that's such a regime in Kenyan high school, this idea of those guys are devil worshippers. And it's always like the kids who are like reading different things, the kids who have different opinions. So that's when I first came across this idea that different means scary.
Yes.
Different means evil. Right?
Yeah.
And as a teenager, that was difficult, because then I was like, in addition to being queer, then there's this other devil worship bullshit, which is not true, right? And then, so it stayed with me, that experience of being othered for thinking differently, right? And so I started to become curious about the ways that Kenyans almost worship out of fear. Right? Yeah. And for me, the relationship with God is not so much about being afraid of God. So you're like, you worship him otherwise. Such, and that question branched forward, because there's a time I remember asking my Christian friends, like, when you pray to God, do you ever visualize him? Is it a him? Is he black? And those questions always used to make the Christians in my circles just be like, you're just being like provocative. But I'm like, honestly, I really want to know. I really want to know, when you're on your knees praying, are you praying to a black man, woman? Are you praying to a... And most of them would say, oh, it's like a ball of light. There's no, it's not a body. It's not and I'm like, okay, at least I prefer those ones to the ones who are truly mystified by that question. And then you see the controversy around the scientists saying that Jesus was actually quite dark-skinned.
Yes.
And like, you can see like in America, they're like, no.
He's not.
That's some bullshit. Yeah. Because there's no way we are worshipping a dark-skinned person. So for me, I'm like, okay, if heaven has the same racial politics, right? Does it mean that then, and like, if someone, for instance, slave owners, if they repent at the moment of their death,
do they go to heaven?
Do they go to the same heaven where the slaves that they killed? Then heaven sounds to me like this really difficult place.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension.
A lot of tension and a lot of like unresolved shit. And I'm like, so in heaven, then is there like a place where the black people go? Those are the questions I had. They're all kind of like ridiculous questions on some level, because now I can see that that's not the point. But for me, the question was like, why is our Christianity so separate from the reality of being black, of being queer, of being all these things, of being African? And for me, the key question there for me is like, what were Africans worshipping before people came with Jesus.
Okay.
And what was it about our gods and our religion that was so easy to hand over and exchange?
And exchange for this
I
new
don't
God.
know any other civilizations and cultures that exchanged their gods. If you read the Bible, people who exchanged their gods, whether it's the Canaanites or whatever, the results were never good.
They were never good, yeah.
Right? And I feel like if you're able to exchange your God, like this person that you worship, you exchange it for some other person, like then what do you have left?
What do you have left,
right?
Yeah.
Everything else is like easier to exchange. Money, resources, but
yeah.
your God, how can you exchange a God? So that's the central question for me. What is it about Africans that made us so insecure about our deepest selves, our souls, that we're able to exchange
that so easily
for some guy, you know?
I think, and guys, we're going to the new film is out. It's called Tapi. You can try and find it. I think that's your job now, as we figured out. But for me, I think that question is very fundamental. I was raised Catholic, and the one thing for me was that around us there was not a lot of people who looked like me, and so the question was always, okay, let's talk about our forefathers, the very first forefathers who didn't know about Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think I asked Anan this, and I asked, so do they all just ban because they didn't know about Jesus? And she said, yes.
Oh.
And I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem very fair.
No.
And the problem with something like Catholicism, and this is just my opinion, is that there's no compromise in Catholicism. It's always like you're either down with Jesus or you're burning in hell. And I'm like, but I don't know. How do you ban for something that you do not know?
Yeah.
So that has always been a struggle for me. And having especially been raised Catholic, that's always been a struggle for me. Now, the question that I want to come back to now is this. I think 2 years ago, and it's tied to the same thing that we're talking about right now. Last year or the year before that, I can't really remember. You and I had a very intense conversation about repatriation of African artifacts back to Africa, because from what I know is that there's more African artifacts and works of art in European museums than there are on the continent.
Yeah.
So there's either they're in a museum somewhere or they were basically raised down during a purge of some sort. Tell us about your endeavors in this, because I know after we spoke about that, you were flying to either Cairo or somewhere in Egypt to speak about this at a conference. Tell us about that.
So the Nest is a partner in a program called the International Inventories Program, which is like a whole group of people coming together to talk about this question of objects. So I think for the past 2 years, we've been reaching out to museums across the world and asking them, do you have any Kenyan objects? And then they send us data, or they don't send us data. So for us, the Nest was interested in this from a political perspective, and also because as individual members, for me, it's this question of like objects leaving. What does that do to people? George from the collective was saying, because right now we are at more than 20,000 objects that we've traced. And George was asking me the other day, he was saying, what does it do to a society to have 20,000 things taken away? Right?
Yeah.
And it's not like China where you're giving away 1 million iPhones.
Yes.
You know, it's like things that people made with their hands.
Yes, exactly.
Memories. In the case of things like the Vigango, which are like the tombstones that are used by the Mijikenda, where they're actually being stolen. And for them, it's like, you've stolen a representation of my grandfather.
Yes.
What does that do to people? And when you go deeper into the question of objects, there's so much trash in there that has been kind of whitewashed.
Yes.
If you think about the British Museum, like they are like, someone described them as the largest active crime scene in the world.
Yeah, and there's evidence there.
And it's because, what is this thing where people go into another society and take their things and like...
One of the most offensive things for me about that, and I think it's when we were having that conversation, is that someone in Belgium actually said, we can't give these back because those people don't know how to take care of them.
Yeah, and that's a thing that we've heard a lot, even in this project, where people are like, do you have the capacity? And like I said, these questions are never asked in a difficult way.
Yeah.
It's, do you have the capacity? And we've visited all these departments that do conservation, and they're like, they show us how they do it, they show us the chemicals they use, and in some instances those objects have been ruined by
through
conservation.
them trying to
They are
preserve them.
now
Yeah.
like toxic objects
Yeah.
because in the 80s people are using all kinds of crazy chemicals. So then the question for me about capacity is odd. I've been looking at the data in the database that has been sent. So much incorrect data,
Yeah.
right? So many misspellings of people's tribal names,
or even object names.
misattributions.
Yes.
So then I'm like, what is capacity here?
Yeah.
When for me, I'm a layman,
Yeah.
but I can look at that data and tell you that's
wrong.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, we already know asbestos is not the bestos. So that's one thing. Stop using asbestos to try and preserve our artifacts.
So yeah, I think for the longest time, Africans have been put in situations where they feel like their knowledge is not knowledge, their science is not science, their capacity is not capacity. And I'm like, guys, it's everywhere. And I swear, you could move from any industry. Right now I'm in the arts. If I move to science, I know I'll find the same stuff.
Yes.
I'll find the same issue of privileges. I'll find the same issue of Africans not being sure of themselves. If I go to mining, I swear it's everywhere.
Yeah. No, I've been in a few industries in my lifetime, and the one thing that is very prevalent is that there's an issue of people following up on you. Like, can you really do it? Are you really qualified based on your skin tone?
Or being surprised.
Yes. When people read a paper you've written
Yeah.
and you published, and people are not aware, there's no face to that. But
Yeah.
once they meet you, you can always see there's surprise there. And
Yeah.
I find that most offensive, whereby someone is surprised that I wrote this, or
Yeah.
a black person did this.
So 2 stories. I think my photography career, in advertising particularly, I found out later on that people hired me because they didn't know if Chuchu was a Kenyan name.
Kenyan name, yeah.
And a lot of shoots had show up and people would be like, oh.
Oops.
And it turned out that then there was this rumor that I was as an Asian.
Yeah.
And I met a lot of Kenyan photographers who would disguise their surnames.
Yeah.
They'd call themselves 2 English names.
Yes.
And they told me that they're doing that because
that.
because in this industry, only white people, only foreigners are trusted with photography. So in a sense, perhaps there were moments where I even benefited from having a name that people were not able to place.
That's why I thought you didn't exist. I was like, this is a collective of people.
So since then, I've had everything. Your English is so good. And there's one I like. Have you studied abroad?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you say no, I like all my schooling was in Kenya. Then people are like, huh.
Oh, okay.
And that's interesting for me because then I'm like, what is it about the things I know that could only have been learned
from
outside
abroad?
Kenya?
Yeah. Okay, let's change steps now and speak about 2 things. Let's speak about HEVA, where you're a founding member and member. And also there is the Nest Collective, where you're a founding member and member. So the question here is, what is HEVA and what role is it playing in the creative community in Kenya? And the Nest Collective, which is basically a collective of different disciplinary artists and creatives. So what is HEVA and what role is it playing? And for the Nest, why bring all these artists together?
When the Nest started, because it was one that came before HEVA, we, in our heads, I think George and I, who were the ones who founded it, we met in 2008 after the post-election violence. And I think we were surrounded by people who were interested in, like, as photographers, as artists, how do we do something about what's going on? I think Boniface Mwangi was one of those. George was coming from a different place because he was coming from a very social work, youth work kind of place. And so he was telling us, George was interesting because he was able to look at artists and say, there's a way you can translate. So Picha Mtaani, this project that Boniface did, it was George who kind of like looked at the work and designed it and said, you can go around the country. So the thing with all of us is that we're all working from our bedrooms, our homes. And there was a sense that there's things that you cannot do from your bedroom,
home,
right? Meetings are difficult to have, etc., etc. So in our heads, the Nest was us committing to a space where we could do all the things
that you needed
in a space, right? So for the first year the Nest ran, we were thinking of it as a place where all these people who didn't really fit in to other playgrounds that existed in the city at the time, because at the time I think if you were a dancer you went to Sarakasi, if you were a visual artist you went to Kuona, but then there was all these people who were doing like digital art,
photography,
poetry, and it was like no place for them. So we said, okay, let's create the space. For the first year we did all these programs where we would just mash people together, like poets and architects and
whatever,
do something. And after a year we're like, okay, it doesn't really work, like to just mash people together. And in fact the people who learned so much were us, because
not
the artists, right? So we're like, yo, okay, how about we start to make work internally based on all these things that we're learning? And that's where the idea of the collective came.
Okay.
Since then the collective has shifted many times, because even film was a transition for us, music was a transition for us. We've had several transition points where we're like, we want to explore a new thing. The thing that's different about us, because most people in the HEVA collective, they think of individual fully formed artists coming together. For us, some of us don't even consider ourselves artists, right? For us, the artist is the collective. So we make work together, which is a good thing sometimes, it's a bad thing sometimes. For film, it's difficult because for film, people are like, who directed it? And that happens a lot with the work of the collective. People are like, who directed it? Jim Chuchu. So it's a film by Jim Chuchu.
They want to put ownership to
exactly.
it.
Who edited? Who wrote? And we're like, it's very difficult to explain collective authorship to the systems that distribute and promote art. So there's always been
always a challenge.
Strange.
I'll say this though for a fact, is that as Sticks and Stones, we actually decided to morph into a collective, aping what the Nest does. You were like, we can steal this idea, and we took it and ran. Because for a long time, like I don't consider myself an artist. I don't consider myself a creative of sorts. I always think of myself as the person who's surrounded by creatives and trying to create structures for creatives so that the energies are channeled in a particular direction. And then when I meet people and I tell them some of the things that I do, and they're like, oh, you're actually a creative. And I'm like, no, I'm not. So I get where the tension in that, there's ownership in the collective that comes from. So HEVA, tell us about what HEVA is.
So HEVA started as a project within the Nest. And it was, for us, the question was like, I guess when you travel around the world and you go to other countries where a film festival is partners with the city. You know, the mayor's office.
So like Toronto
brands.
Film Festival.
And when you look at Kenya, it's like we don't have that culture of like systemic support for the arts, right? You don't have like the government setting aside money for ballet or whatever. So we'd come back from those trips and be like, this country, like the artist carries the burden of training,
everything,
research, production, even in many cases distribution,
promotion, everything.
Like the artist in many African cities, the artist is carrying too much of the value, like too much of the risk is in the artist. Right? And so we started to ask questions. What does this mean in terms of like, shall we as artists ever own homes? Are we able to take credit to buy equipment? Because you go to a bank and they don't understand.
I think a few have been laughed out of banks.
They're
like, you're paying
out. And it's shifting now slowly, but like in 2013 when we started HEVA, there was just no understanding. So the naive question that started HEVA was this idea: what does it take for us as artists to own homes, to have life insurance, to have all these things that make you an adult, right? And so we went out and started doing research around this question, and then HEVA met so many answers. HEVA has really grown. HEVA has really matured in terms of like becoming this organization that makes the ecosystem work better. Because what we have learned is that there are some things that state has to do. There are some things that collectives have to do. There are things that representative bodies have to do. Like, and as individual artists, you can't
do those.
Right? So the relationship then between HEVA and Nest, because most of the people who work at Nest also work at HEVA, has become that we work at HEVA to remember what it's like to make work. and then we work at HEVA to remember what it's like to support other people to make work.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
So you work at Nest to remember what it is
Yeah.
like to make work.
Yeah.
And then what it is like to support other
Yeah.
works is at HEVA.
So like the person who runs the Cultural Heritage Fund at HEVA is a DJ. So like she's not gonna be like, why haven't you? You know, like because
she knows what
she knows.
She
right?
knows the pain of
the guy who heads research at HEVA is like Mars, who is like
a producer.
a DJ. So like you're not gonna tell him that artists should not pull up their socks. He understands.
He knows.
So those two relationships have been useful. And on the Nest side, HEVA has been useful for us to understand money.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying that a lot of the fears that artists have about money come from a place of like not understanding, never have been given a chance to understand.
Ignorance, yes.
So now Nesters are much more clear about like, okay, raising money, profit, revenue, blah, blah, blah. It's been useful for us.
It's been useful.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. And I believe we're drawing to the close of the podcast, but it's always very important for me to ask this, especially in the times that we're in. How do you keep sane? There's so much. And when we were researching this, we were like, okay, this. And that is why I believe like there was various people doing this. How do you keep sane, Jim? Or you don't?
I'm getting better at it. I think there have been times when things were too much and even for Nest and HEVA, because like this thing where I do many things, I've infected everyone at Nest and HEVA with it. And so people would say yes to things. They'd be like, research, film,
music, let's do it.
And then like these things just collide together and you're like, oh shit, what are we doing? Because everyone wants everything now. So I'm learning now that then there's a thing I've been doing lately where I divide my days into like 1 hour,
slots,
half hour blocks, and it allows me to do HEVA, Nest, personal work, music, all these things. It's been useful. And I guess this pandemic has been interesting because then you're forced to stay at home to sit with yourself. So two things I've learned is that, time management, you have to be very serious. You have to show up to your own work like it's a meeting. I see artists going for meetings and they dress up, they are on time. But then showing up to your own work, it's like, oh, you can.
I feel like that's me.
In.
That's me. That's me on most occasions.
So if you program your day as if everything is a meeting, even if you're the only person in the meeting, it seems to work for me. To work.
That is curious because I actually thought that you use like magic to do it, because you make let's go back to music. You make music as Jim Chuchu. You've made music in Just a Band. You've made music as the Nest. Guys, we're going to link the new Nest album down here. But during our research, we also found out that you have a pseudonym. There's this alter ego called Adeyu.
Oh, God.
Surprise. So why did you choose to make music as Adeyu? And also tell me if I'm revealing like a huge secret. It's like Batman is Bruce Wayne.
It was a secret for all of maybe a year at most. What happened is that I think I'd left Just a Band in 2012.
Yeah.
And the music was still in me. And I felt like I didn't have I felt like it was confusing for Jim to start making music. I felt like it was too soon after Just a Band, but the music was in me.
Still new.
I was like, I need to put this stuff out. I need to make this stuff. So I created this pseudonym, put out the music. And there's something, because for me, ego is a big thing that artists have to deal with. Yeah. Because I think the world has a way of inflating ego, creative egos especially. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because for me, I feel like the best art is channeled.
Yes.
It comes through you, right? And for you to then stamp the work with your name and say, I did that. This, I've always felt like there's something there that's not that's not true.
I actually feel the same way. The work should speak for itself. It's not really about the individual. It's more about the content that you've made. Yeah.
And if you talk to artists, you find that their best work almost came like, it's almost like they didn't do it themselves. It just came through them, and it came in a complete, but when your ego is in front and you're saying, I'm amazing, I'm going to do this, that's when the art actually struggles to come through you. So that having a pseudonym was interesting because then I was able to make without it being attached to me. And it was then interesting for people to dig that music because then I was like, you're not digging this
because it's
because
Jim.
of any relationship you have with Jim.
Yeah.
And since then, I've always been interested in this idea of separating the ego from the work. And I highly encourage people to have pseudonyms and alter egos because it allows you to get in touch with being new again.
Yeah. Starting from nothing.
Yeah, starting without any
leverage or baggage.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorts,
because then, like, I think I did I Dare You and it was featured in some campaign form, and I was like, yo, this is the work.
Yeah.
It's not
Jim.
It's nothing I've done before, right? But now it's become weird because like I'm unable to separate my signatures from the work.
Are there any other? I'm not going to ask them. Are there other alter egos? There are a bunch of those. Research department, you're failing us.
There are a bunch, and I think it's always cool to make work almost like a virgin again. Yeah.
What is the role of creatives during the pandemic? As we're living in an existence that we can't deny, how do we as creatives stay positive? How do we as creatives keep creating during this period of time?
I feel like on some level I've been feeling like the creatives have actually not been and I guess Kenyan creatives, we have a lot of work because this country, not everything is fine, right?
Yeah.
And for the longest time, the arts have separated themselves from the reality of what's going on in the country. Like, people can be on the streets fighting and you're there at home painting abstract.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
True, yeah.
We have a culture where the arts...
Separate.
Art is a thing you do, it's not a thing that you are.
Yeah.
And so I feel like sometimes the creatives really let the country down.
Mm-hmm.
They let the society down because our work is to put words to things that people are feeling. It's to put colors and to put images on things that people are not able to understand. Mm-hmm. There's something someone told me once where I said something and they said, I've been feeling that word that you've said, and it's really helpful for me to hear that word. And for me, then I understood then that there's some things that we are able to do as artists and creatives where we link feelings, urgent feelings sometimes, to images and to sounds in a way that helps people get through things. So a lot of people have been asking, what are we supposed to do during a pandemic? What are we supposed to do when the world is on fire? Because the world is on fire.
It is on fire.
We have locusts, we have COVID, we have Black lives being questioned about their validity. What are we supposed to do? You're supposed to make work. You're supposed to feel that pain. You're supposed to express that pain. You're not supposed to run away and kind of say,
hide and,
let's do whatever is trendy. Let's
do challenges.
Do the work.
Yeah. Do the work is the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then even when this pandemic is over, we do have a role as artists to link our work much more to the fact that the world is in a place where we need to reorganize society.
Yeah.
We need to reorganize where we eat.
We need to relook at
politics.
Yeah, the structures.
And artists need to get in there. They need to be making work about the future, about how we can design society better, how we can treat women better, how we can treat others and immigrants better. You can't be at home
comfortable while the people
like posting cute things on Instagram and the world's on fire, guys.
That's true.
Yeah,
I think that's very insightful. I have a set for my stand-up comedy where I say the reason that we are having all of this, like the locusts, floods, drought, famine, the plague, is because for a long time Kenyans have been asking God to do something about the politicians, and God sent the plagues to remind them that they chose the Jubilee administration. But that's a different plane. The next question is this. Again, research department, if you failed us, their heads will roll. Jim, producer, director, filmmaker, musician, artist, visual artist, I think at this point in time, motivational speaker, superhero on the weekends, is also a baker. So the question I have, it seems to be true, he's blushing. The question I have is that if I go and buy a bread at the supermarket that's made in some industrial company with, I don't know, machines and whatever, and I eat it, and on the other hand, I go and eat the bread that is made by Jim, musician, artist, director, filmmaker, visual artist. Will it taste different?
Yes.
Is Jim's bread better? Or are you going to tell me like taste is subjective? You know how artists are always dodging things.
Taste is subjective.
So it's bad.
Listen to the crust, not the ingredients. I think food is interesting for me because like food is art. I don't think people consider food like art, and people don't think that you can communicate with food. You definitely can. I think parents communicate care to children using food, or even sometimes they communicate a lack of care using food. So for me, food has always been a thing that's very meditative, very creative, and it's also a way of telling people, you know, like I like you people.
I made Madeleines for you guys, I think 3 years
those
ago.
Madeleines were amazing, actually.
You had it from Jim. It's like any haters out there, you just had it from Jim.
And like, I mean, there's something cool there about like, I guess also Kenyans have this thing of like masculinity means you never step into the kitchen.
In the kitchen,
And I feel like there's so masculinity is this prison for me, because like there's so many, masculinity seems to me to be so much about what you can't do more than what you can. And I always worry about things that are framed by the by the
negative instead of the positive.
Because then I'm like, so what is masculinity? Because I know that masculinity means that you can't dance, you can't laugh, you can't hug people,
you can't cry,
you can't cook, you can't cry. And I'm like, okay, people need to start telling me what are you allowed to do?
What can I do?
Right.
Like with this. This comes down to gangster points, Onyach. You always hear like counting gangster points. You need to stop that shit.
Because like I think being human means that you must laugh, you must dance, you must hug people. And if masculinity is then saying that you can't do that, then I'm like, is masculinity meaning that you're not human superhuman? It doesn't
what
seem
is
to
it?
work.
Final question of the day is that we always ask this to everyone who comes onto the podcast, and the question is always, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to? However, you've written books. I'm plugging right there. Not African Enough. You guys can find it in all great bookstores.
That book.
But you were part of the collective. So the next collective made that book. So you've written books. You've made films. You've made music. Are you just sitting at home listening to yourself, reading your own stuff, and just watching your own? Like it's a shrine of the things that Jim has done. What are you listening to? What are you watching? What are you reading?
Yikes! I actually watch a lot of trashy things.
That's okay. No
it allows me to rest my mind, because when I watch like good cinema, I'm like, oh, how did they do that?
How did he? You take notes.
So that's not restful. So I think I'm watching a lot of cooking competitions. I watch a lot of trashy like Michael Bay, Explosion, because then my mind can like just.
You need to watch a reality show called The Circle. Rachel and I were watching that. It's just ridiculous.
Okay.
You would love that. It's good trash. It keeps the mind going.
Yeah, and then I am listening to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
Podcasts about food, about history. Like the other day I was listening to like who Vladimir Putin is.
Yeah.
And like it's interesting that human beings come together and become a legend or a myth or whatever.
Like you have. Like I was like, this man is a myth.
Podcasts are cool because then like you can do other things while
listening to them. Listen to this podcast as you try and bake bread. That's what Jim is saying.
Absolutely. And reading. I'm reading like 12 books at the same time, which is not a good idea. But a lot of comics, a lot of Mau Mau history, because I've been finding out that Kenyans have always been Kenyans.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a thing Kenyans do where we think that people in the past were more honorable than tribal.
Yes.
No,
it's just the same thing.
We were the same disunited people.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to read that stuff. And also, I don't know why they don't teach us this stuff in school. Yeah.
So that's what's going on. My challenge is this. I used to read quite avidly when I was younger. And now, for me right now, the way I consume data and information is through watching. Like, especially, I may be watching a film and at the same time, I'm watching how to do some woodworking videos, like instructional. So that, for me, translates very quickly. And then I've tried to do audiobooks, which is okay, but not really the same. Because there's a fulfillment when you turn pages and read actual books.
Yeah.
Parting shots. Do you want to give shout outs to anyone? Do you want to say anything to the people at large? Speak to the people, Jim. Speak to the people.
I would. What have I been thinking about lately? I don't think Beyonce should be doing this thing that she did.
Why do you want this podcast to get cancelled? You know the Bayhive is crazy.
I'm just worried about, like, I think people have always said you can't take diamonds, you can't take oil from Africa. But now there's a thing that's happening where people are now coming to Africa. You harvest aesthetics, images,
yes.
ideas, and then you take them away. So this thing people are asking, where you make this film about Africans and you put it on Disney,
Yeah.
which Africans can't access.
access,
There's a real question there. And the question for me is about how do black publics relate to one another?
Yeah.
The tension between the diaspora and the continental Africans is becoming sharper and sharper.
Yeah.
And it's a thing for us to think about.
It's a thing for us. I think.
Man, that's a terrible parting shot.
No. That's a great parting shot. It's good to leave people thinking. My parting shot is, and I wrote this a while back, is that as regular Africans, we see what's going on in America. We empathize and we sympathize with what's going on, and we are ashamed because these are stolen children and they're out there and they're helpless. But even those of us who are here are also helpless. There's a lot that we can't really do, even with our own regimes, with our own governments. We're trying, but it's quite difficult. So I would say the role of creatives for me right now is to be able to show, at the very least, let's not silence those voices. Whatever is happening in all these places, in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, all of these places, we need to at least show it. If people can see it, then we're doing something.
Oh, wait, I have a better parting shot.
Okay,
if
go
you're
ahead.
an artist, do the stuff that you're afraid of doing. I meet a lot of people who say, how do you know which project to choose?
Yeah.
And I say the one that makes
Scares you most.
afraid, that's the one that you are put here to do.
Excellent. I think we'll leave that as the best parting shot. The executive producer for this show has been the most amazing Sticky. He's also done this amazing
I love it.
piece here. This show is supported by people who believe in what Sticks and Stones is doing. There are also people out there who really love us for free, and people like Jim who choose to come to our podcast and ideally just sit and chat with us. The director for the show has been Wanjira Gateri Humphrey. My name is Eric. I'm the host of this podcast. If you see anything here that you like, it has most likely been made by the people of this collective, except for this gentleman. We've not made him, but he's a friend of ours. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on Chatterbox.